Welcome everyone to Ein Sof Learning. This is episode number 2 of our new series that we began last week on a beginner's guide to the tree of life, to the 10 Sefirot, the 10 dimensions of reality. We know that in Kabbalah there are 10 dimensions of consciousness, 10 levels of closeness or distance from the light. The light is the endless reality of fulfillment which preceded the creation of the world. The world that we live in today, what we call this world, is at the bottom of the chain of the 10 Sefirot. So there are different ways of applying the understanding of this 10 Sefirot, this tree of life. You can apply it within reality itself. There are 10 dimensions to reality. You can apply it within the context of character traits, because each Sephirah is really an attribute of God, which we're going to explain shortly. Or you can think of it as the stages of development of life, because the first Sephirah, which is Keter, is the seed. The second one, which is Chokhmah, is the roots of the seed whenever it sprouts. Bina is the trunk whenever it pops out of the surface of the soil. And the following 6 Sefirot, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, are the branching out, the branches of the tree, while Malchut is the fruits of the tree, meaning the end result. It is the product, the result of what you're looking for by planting the tree in the first place. So there are different ways of understanding the 10 Sefirot. Truly, the 10 Sefirot are a diagram of life itself. That's why it's called Tree of Life, because you can apply this system of 10 circles, 10 dimensions, 10 levels to any system in the world. You can apply it to the way a human being exists. As you can see, human beings are made in the image of the 10 Sefirot. That is the image, right? But without getting too deep, I want to start by explaining each Sefirah one by one until we finish all 10 of the Sefirot. But I want to begin with the lower 7 Sefirot, because there is a great big distinction between the first 3 Sefirot, called Keter, Chokhmah, and Bina, and the lower 7, which are Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. The lower 7 Sefirot are inclusive of the emotional attributes of a person, while the upper 3 Sefirot are the intellectual faculties of a person. In order to reach the higher levels of our consciousness, called Keter, Chokhmah, and Bina, we need to first attain the lower 7 Sefirot, which are our character traits. So I want to begin with explaining the Midah of Chesed, the attribute of kindness, which is the first of the 7 lower Sefirot. Let's get into it. What is Chesed? Chesed means kindness. However, where the standard definition of kindness ends, the Jewish concept of Chesed begins. The sages tell us that the Torah begins and ends with Chesed. The Chesed at the end of the Torah is that God buried Moses. God buried Moses, and that was an act of Chesed. Burying the dead is the ultimate act of kindness, as one does not expect any favor in return. Whenever somebody goes and buries a person who passed away, this is an act of Chesed, because he's not going to get anything in return. That guy is not able to pay him back any favor. He's died. But the Talmud refers to the burial of the dead as Chesed Shel Emet. That means true kindness, befitting the Torah's finale. We know that the Torah begins with the creation of the world, and it ends with the burial of Moses. The last letter, or the last word of the Torah, is Israel. It ends with the letter Lamed. But the Torah begins with the letter Bet, in the word Bereshit, in the beginning. So if you take the 2 letters, the first in the beginning and the last one at the end of the Torah, you get Lamed Bet, which is Lev. Lev is heart. And also there are Lamed Bet Netivot Chokhmah. There are 32 paths to wisdom. Now that aside, let's get back. The Chesed at the beginning of the Torah is that God clothed Adam and Chava. Whenever Adam clothed Chava and Adam, meaning Adam and Eve, this is an act of chesed as well. True altruism. There are so many acts of God prior to this in the first chapters of Bereshit that show kindness. Just to remind ourselves why it is an act of chesed for God to clothe Adam and Eve. Because Adam and Eve sinned against God. They broke the rule that God had told them not to eat from the tree of knowledge, but they ate from it anyways. But even so, God goes out of his way and clothes Adam and Eve with garments. In an act of rebellion, God is still there showing his kindness. So there are so many acts of God that are prior to this, meaning prior to this story in Bereshit, in the Genesis story, in the first chapters of Bereshit, that show kindness. Creation itself, or the fact that God provided the trees and food for Adam and Chava, is also an act of chesed. The act of creation was an act of chesed. Why did God create the world? Because he wants to bestow good to his creations. Good means chesed. Chesed is the attribute of good. He wants to bestow good, love. Chesed also resembles the attribute of ahava, which is love. Within a person, that means we have to express love of God, love to our neighbor, right? That's why when we say the Shema Yisrael, we say Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The word one in Hebrew is Echad. Echad is Gematria 13. That means that if you add up the letters in the word Echad, you get Aleph, which is numerical value 1, Chet, which is numerical value 8, plus Dalid, which is 4. You get 13. 13 is the same numerical value as the word Ahava, which means love. So you can reread the Shema Yisrael as the following. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is love. Hashem is love. So this is a deeper explanation of the Shema Yisrael, but it's still a true interpretation. In other words, God is love, and he wants to bestow love. He wants to bestow good. God is the true good, and it is the nature of the good to do good. So the act of creation, we can know for sure, was for the sake of bestowing goodness to his created beings. Now, if that's really the purpose of the creation, why are there pain and suffering and evil in this world? If the purpose of the creation was to do good, then why is there so much bad? This is, of course, another question for another time. But I would add one thing, is that just because things appear to be bad in the moment does not mean that it actually is bad. That's one thing. But on another note, yes, sometimes we see pain and suffering in the world, but we know that this world has not yet reached its fruition. Because if the purpose of the creation was to bestow good, well, guess what? It takes a development. We're in the world of time. We're in the world of development. So therefore, the fruition, the end result, the purpose of the creation has not yet been fulfilled. Therefore, we have not yet reached that end result, which is the purpose of the creation, which is a life of goodness, a world of peace, a world of basking in the light of God. We have not yet reached tikkun olam, the correction of the world. But that is, nevertheless, the purpose of the creation, and we will get there. Whenever he provided the trees and the food for Adam and Eve, right? That was also an act of chesed. Did Adam and Eve earn anything that they had in the tree of life, in the Garden of Eden, excuse me? No, they didn't earn it. Easy come, easy go. That's why they made the sin in the Garden of Eden. They went down to the lowest world, which is where we are, right? But really, that's not the deepest interpretation of the story. We know that Kabbalistically, everything in the Torah has deeper levels of understanding. So the sin in the Garden of Eden was really an act of Adam and Eve volunteering to enter the exiled world, which already existed before they ate from the tree. And their mission is to correct that world. And those are the souls of Israel, which are in the creation. They come from Adam. And they are here to rectify the world and bring tikkun. Tikkun means correction or rectification to this world, not just to the Jewish people, but for all four corners of the world, for all types of creations, men, women, animals, plants, minerals, everything needs to be corrected. This is the world of tikkun. This is the world that needs to be rectified. Why then did the sages consider his kindness in providing clothing to Adam and Chava the first act of Chesed? If there are previous acts of Chesed in the Torah that predate the act of giving Adam and Eve their clothing, for example, the act of creation itself precedes whenever God gave them the clothing. So if that is the case, then why do the sages say that God giving clothes to Adam and Eve is the first act of Chesed? Why did they say it's the first one? This happened well into the creation narrative after they ate from the forbidden tree. The answer is precisely in that timing. Namely, after the sin, before Adam and Eve sinned, before they made the sin in the tree of with the tree of knowledge, God was obliged to provide all their needs, right? Because God created them, and therefore He's responsible for them. So He takes care of Adam and Eve. But once He decided to create the world, whenever He decided to create the world, He can't do any less than that. Like we said, the reason for the creation was to do good. So before they made the sin, He was obliged to provide. He was obliged to do good. There's nothing special there. However, after they sinned, after they rebelled against Him, God continued to provide their needs and gave them clothing. This is true Chesed. Chesed is not going beyond the letter of the law. It's going against what justice dictates should be done. This is Chesed. Chesed does not mean justice. Kindness is not an act of justice. Kindness is righteousness. That means going above justice, going beyond the letter of the law. That's why many times I hear people who say, justice is a prerequisite to peace. And the Jewish response to that sentiment is no. Justice is not a prerequisite to peace. If you go the justice route, you will never get to peace because both sides are right and both sides are wrong. Therefore, the war will continue. It will never end. It takes humility. It takes true righteousness to go above the letter of the law, to go beyond the justice of what is expected of this world. To give true chesed, that means to bestow kindness, even in moments where justice might be expected, where justice might be justified, right? That is true chesed. Chesed is also known as gedulah. Gedulah means greatness. God is great. Gadol. God is gadol. Because He is constantly doing chesed. Constantly, God does chesed. Even though the world may not deserve it. This is true chesed. Even when you don't deserve it, Hashem bestows chesed to you. So this is one of the attributes that we have to learn to emulate. Whenever a person does evil against you, insults you, goes against you, right? Humiliates you, makes fun of you. Perhaps it will feel selfishly that it would hurt your ego. But we have to learn to go above the ego. We have to learn to go above the desire to receive for the self alone, which means survival mode. Get out of the survival mode, reactive mode consciousness. Get out of the victim mode consciousness. Because these are all synonyms. Survival mode is victim mode. And victim mode means that there are forces beyond your control that are oppressing you. Right? We don't believe in that. You create your destiny. You create the life that you live. You create the world that you have. As harsh as that could sometimes sound, but that is what Kabbalah teaches. Therefore, Chesed in the Torah is personified by the patriarch Avraham. Avraham Avinu resembles the midah of Chesed, the attribute of Chesed. His life was dedicated to caring about others. From the minute that Abraham really began his journey, whenever in Lech Lecha God said, "Get up and go out of this land, and go to the land which I will show you," right? up until the end, whenever he became Avraham. First he was Avram, then he became Avraham with a hey added to it because he reached Gadlut. He reached his greatness, right? And that is the Mira of Chesed. He reached Chesed. He pleads with God to save the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. City of Sodom and Gomorrah were cities of evil people, right? That's the way that the sages describe it, that it was a city of sin, like Las Vegas, but 10 times worse. Sodom and Gomorrah is a very dark place. Yet Abraham, the patriarch of the Jewish people, pleads with God to save the lives of Sodom and Gomorrah. Let the people live, he argues, despite the fact that they are wicked. So Abraham really embodies that attribute, that even whenever justice is justified, he goes above the letter of the law and says, no, even though they are making sins, even though they don't deserve it, find it within your kindness to let them live. Abraham also embodies Chesed when he sits in the heat of the sun, waiting for travelers to pass so that he can invite them into his home. Abraham was sitting in the desert in the hot heat of the sun. In many ways, right now, it's very hot. Abraham was sitting in the desert, and he was waiting there for passers-by to then go out of his way and invite them into his house. Abraham invites everyone, even if their religious beliefs diametrically opposed his own. He used to bring idol worshippers into his tent. He used to bring people who would worship other gods into his tent. His tent is always open on all four sides. That is the attribute of true Chesed. Chesed finds the commonality and kinship between all of creation. And that commonality destroys any concept of individuality. Chesed is the common denominator that binds all things together. The attribute of Chesed is an infinite spark where you give without boundaries. You give without caring who is receiving. You don't even care about the receiver per se. It's all about giving. Like a white hole. It's the opposite of a black hole. Black hole receives. But a white hole, I know not such a thing exists in the physical world, right? But perhaps there's a spiritual concept, right? Maybe spiritual concept of a white hole, which is a giving instead of a receiving. That's really what Chesed is. More specifically, Chesed is the desire for life. It is the life force of something. Chesed resembles life, the life force of the universe, which is the ultimate purpose of creation. What's the ultimate purpose of the creation? Like we said, for God to bestow kindness to his created beings. Chesed makes no distinction between species. Chesed is simply life without differentiation. It's the raw essence of reality. At the root, everyone is connected to everyone else through Chesed. Through the attribute of Chesed, we're all connected. This is the reason that we must show kindness to each other, because it is only then that we are being honest and true to who we are at our core. The first day of creation represents Chesed. As we said, Chesed is the first of the 7 Sefirot. Therefore, how many days of creation are there? 6 days of creation, while the 7th is the day of rest, Shabbat. But the first day of creation, Yom Rishon, right, that was whenever God created light. The creation of unbounded light, which shines in all directions without limit, is the outpouring of Chesed. Chesed is expansion. Chesed is illumination. It's life. It's giving. Chesed is represented by the right column. If you look at the tree of life, the 10 Sefirot, you will find 3 columns of Sefirot. The right, left, and the center. The right column is where you have Chokhmah, Chesed, and Netzach. The left column is where you have Bina, Gevura, and Hod. While the central column, you have Keter, Tiferet, Yesod, and Malchut. Now, the attribute of Chesed is on the right column, which we said the right column is the dominant, it is the giving energy, right? It represents the right arm or the right hand. Chesed represents the right arm. Whenever a person gives, they give with their right arm, right? It's always the hand of giving. Acts of Chesed should ideally be done, therefore, with the right hand. Whenever you give charity, you should give it with your right hand. Whenever you wrap tefillin in the morning, that's why we use our right hand to wrap the tefillin on our left arm, because the left arm resembles Gevurah, which is Isaac. Abraham is Chesed, Isaac is Gevurah, so Abraham binds Isaac. Chesed binds Gevurah. The right arm binds the left arm. Chesed is also likened to water. The attribute of Chesed resembles Maim, because water flows in all directions without distinction. If you were to pour a bucket of water on the floor, immediately it'll go down into the cracks of the ground. It will sink to the bottom. Why? Because it is the nature of water to just flow. There is no rules. It doesn't have any rules. It takes the shape of the vessel. If you pour water into a cup, it takes the shape of the cup. It doesn't have any shape of its own because it is boundless. Life, light, water, boundless. Whenever you put light into a room, it doesn't have any shape. The light takes the shape of the room, right? It's the same idea. Chesed is kindness. There should be no boundaries to the chesed whenever it comes to your fellow Jew. Love thy neighbor as thyself does not just mean whenever they are nice to you. It means that specifically whenever they do things that are against you, specifically whenever they don't know better and they sin against you or they do evil against you, go above and beyond the reactive consciousness. Go above the selfish mode and tell yourself, he doesn't know better. I'll have to help him. And there's different ways of helping him. One of the ways of helping him is by disengaging with him. Believe it or not, that can be an act of chesed. Or you see that somebody is struggling, he needs money, he's starving. But in your mind, the justice tells you he doesn't deserve it because he put himself in that situation. But the chesed in you starts to speak and says, yes, he doesn't deserve it, but I want to be a channel for the light of God. And so therefore, I'm going to give without boundaries. And that helps people remember hope, remember faith, remember God. Whenever we embody the attribute of chesed in this world, we are actually revealing the divine attribute of chesed in this world. And we are conduit for that light. So this is the attribute of chesed. Next week, we're going to learn about gevurah, which is the inverse of chesed. It is a lack of chesed, but not necessarily in a bad way. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.